The other thing I want to mention or ask is, in this room, who is using an RO currently? That kind of helps me gauge. So 50% of us. What kind of size range? Most everybody 1,000 taps or less, I'm assuming here. That's kind of what I figured. So most of the ROs we're going to be talking about then are all the small 4-inch type machines. Most of you are going to be running a machine that looks somewhat similar to this, maybe a different brand, but 4-inch posts, not 8-inch posts. There's some key differences in design on the small machines versus the big machines, the way the pumps are set up, size of the pumps, recirculation pumps, some things like that. But the principles of operation are the same regardless. We're still using pressure to force water through a membrane. So I'd like to start out with how the system works first, so everybody's kind of got a basic understanding of what we're trying to accomplish with this machine. So the RO, as it says there, has two basic functions. Not only is it using the pressure to separate the water from the sugar, but we're also going to be filtering that sap as it's going through it. That filtration is an important step of the machine in keeping that machine clean. Running good pre-filters that are fine enough for what your membranes need is important to keeping the machine running for longer operational cycles. They get dirty fast if you're using pre-filters that are not tight enough for what your machine is. Our machines are all specifically designed, or the membranes in the machines are specifically designed to separate sugars from waters. There are other types of membrane filtration out there that are separate other things out of water. The membranes we're using, even though they may not be specifically made for maple necessarily, they are designed to be separating sugars from water, sugar and mineral from water, I should say. The membrane, to visualize it in your head, is like a roll of paper towel or a roll of toilet paper wound around a tube. That tube in the middle is where the permeate comes out of. You need the pressure through a series of pumps. Generally, there's at least 2 pumps on an RO, a feed pump and a pressure pump. Some of the smallest machines out there only have 1 pump. The membranes don't require as high a pressure to operate. Those would be your bucket ROs, CDLs, nano RO. Those only have 1 pump on them. They only require 1 pump to build the pressure, from what I understand. Also, the new RO that we came out with, our mini micro, that only has 1 pump as well. That one does build pressure a little bit higher. It's positive displacement pump, so you can get away with 1 pump because of the mechanics of the pump on that machine. Those small machines, generally, if the machine is only running 1 pump, they don't heat up their own wash water. The machine pictured before that micro 2 is using 2 turbine pumps, and the fluid friction those pumps heats up the wash water. So that's one of those design differences between the bigger machines and the smaller machines. The sap is fed vertically through the membrane from the top to the bottom. Actually, in this picture, the way that membrane is oriented, it'd be going from the bottom to the top. The thing to look at here is the brine seal. The brine seal always needs to be in the machine where the sap is coming into it. That brine seal provides a seal so that you can get positive recirculation inside that machine. If you were to install a membrane in a machine without a brine seal, you'd be very dissatisfied with the performance of that membrane. You're not going to wreck anything, but you don't get positive pressure for the recirculation to happen, and the membrane will plug out fast and you'll be getting poor flow through it. Here's a picture of a membrane, or an animated picture of a membrane showing the different parts of a membrane. As I mentioned before with that tube, this is the center tube that the permeate flows to come out of the membrane. There is 5 different layers, 4 different layers of material that comprise that membrane. One of the most important pieces is this feed water carrier. Different membranes have different ratings as far as the square footage of the membrane. Generally, the smaller 4x40 membranes are all 75 square foot membranes. There are some that are 70 square foot membranes as well. The difference is the amount of permeable material inside that membrane, and that rating is in square footage, and what makes that difference is how thick that feed water spacer is. The thicker the feed water spacer is, the less wraps of material they can get inside that membrane, and so the less permeable surface it is. Now, that makes the machine generally run a little bit slower, but machines with thicker feed spacers generally clean up easier. So it's a give and a take. A machine that's running high concentrate, or membranes that are running high concentrate, are better with thicker feed spacers. Machines that are running lower concentrates generally perform better with thinner feed spacers. So after the feed spacer, you have the semi-permeable membrane, that's what's actually doing the true separation of the water out of it. The water molecules can flow through the sugar, and the mineral cannot. And then you have the permeable membrane carrier, which is actually, after the water flows through the membrane or the permeable surface, it goes into that permeable, or the carrier, and that that is going to that center section, the water then goes into the center part of the membrane and flows out of the membrane. So the basic principle of that RO is we're filtering the sugar out of the water. Basically just a tight filter. The membrane is built in such a way that the water can flow through that semi-permeable surface. The sugars cannot, for the most part. There is always a tiny fraction of sugar or mineral that's going through that. It's almost always too small to measure, but there is generally a tiny fraction. They rate that in the rejection rate of the membrane. Generally, the maple industry is running 99.5% rejection rate membranes, so it's an unmeasurable amount. That doesn't mean that 0.5% of your sugar is ending up in the that 0.5% of your sugar is ending up in the permeate. That number comes from something actually rated with salts, so it doesn't really apply a whole lot to our industry, except for the fact that that's the standard industry rating. The demineralized or pure water is the permeate that comes out. That water is about as pure as what pure water gets. As I did mention, there is a small amount of stuff in it, but it's about as pure as any RO water, distilled water is ever going to be. Do you have a question? Okay. Most machines have some sort of pressure adjustment on them. By adjusting the pressure, you can adjust the amount of force you're going to push that water through the membrane. The higher the concentrate level you want to run, the more pressure it's going to take to push that sugar through it. Generally, your smaller machines peak out around 200 to 225 psi. That should get you to about 12 bricks. Anything above 12 bricks requires higher pressure. The bigger machines with the 8-inch pressure vessels, like we pictured here, generally go to 600 psi. 600 gets you to very close to 30 bricks, but usually not quite the 30 bricks. And then the ultra high bricks machines they're making nowadays have 1,000 psi membranes, and those are actually different rated membranes to be able to take that high pressure to get the water out of it, and those will go somewhere to about 45 bricks. Not that that applies to anybody here, but it's interesting information. As the pressures increase, like it says, more water can be removed from the sap, but running very high pressure doesn't necessarily mean you're removing all that. You need the pressure, but also to bring the flow down to a point where that's in the machine long enough to take all that water out. Generally, the higher the pressure you're running on the machine, if you're not allowing the flow to be at the appropriate level, it gets to plug the machine up pretty fast and it can be pretty hard on the membranes. So we try not to run any higher pressure than we have to for what we're trying to get out of it for sugar. So the biggest benefit, obviously, that everybody hears about with reverse osmosis is the saving of time and fuel. Everybody would love to make half as much firewood, I'm sure, burn half as much fuel oil, but there's a couple other things that really help or really change your operation as long as that savings in fuel and time of boiling. The footprint in the sugar house. So what we used to take a 6x16 evaporator to do, we can now do with a 3x10 evaporator and appropriately sized RO. So instead of needing this massive boiling room, we can get by with a much smaller boiling room and a little RO room beside it. So it's a nice benefit if you have an old sugar house and that's something, you're looking to change your operation or modernize things. It'll give you a heck of a lot more room in the sugar house to, do other things in bottling room, or just hopefully store all those extra drums of syrup you're going to be making. The other thing is the ability to maybe have some more storage space around or increase the usefulness of your storage space by having an RO around and available. You can be running the RO as you've got sap coming in, you've got the ability to be there as the sap is coming in, so your storage space doesn't have to be quite as much. I know of a sugar maker in Vermont in particular that's running about 120,000 taps, and they only have about 60,000 gallons of sap storage, so they're getting by with less than about a half a gallon of sap storage per tap, because as soon as they've got sap coming in the door, they're firing up the ROs. Obviously, that's a little bit bigger than most folks here, but if you've got a tubing system for 500 taps, the old rule of thumb was generally that you needed to have about 1,000 gallons of storage. You might be able to get away with somewhat less than that if you can get that RO started and running as soon as you've got sap coming in. So here's just a little bit of information showing how much of the water we're taking out of the sap as we go to different concentration levels. So even going just from 2 to 4, if you've got the smallest RO we make, just going from 2% to 4% bricks, you've already cut your boiling time in half. You've cut your firewood usage in half. So it doesn't take a lot of increase in sugar to be dramatic reductions in boiling time and firewood. Generally, in smaller producers, it seems like everybody's kind of happy in that 8 to 10% bricks range. A lot of guys on, running 2x6s, wood-fired rigs, they run well at that, 10-ish bricks number. When you start getting much above that, the evaporator becomes a little more difficult to run because things happen so fast. But that's kind of where I see a lot of guys going with smaller evaporators and smaller ROs, and that's a good place to be. As you can see, just taking that sap from 2 to 10, you've already taken 80% of the water out. Taking 80% of the water out and 80% less firewood sounds pretty good to me. The RO definitely does change the sap, but not in ways that you're going to be thinking about. A lot of people ask the common question, even still today, after how many different studies by Cornell and UVM, is my syrup going to taste any different? The answer to that question is a little bit more complicated than a yes or a no. If the RO is the only thing you're changing in your operation and you're not going to be doing anything different with your sap handling, should not change the syrup flavor at all. Generally, though, when a producer has an RO, they change other things in their operation. They're adding taps, adding tanks, their cleaning protocols change. All of that stuff then changes your syrup flavor. And that being said, you can still make very good syrup, ROing to very high concentrate levels. We've got producers that are taking their syrup, 20, 25 bricks, and still make award-winning blue ribbon Vermont syrup or Wisconsin syrup or Michigan syrup. So to think that just because you go to that high bricks and you're not boiling that syrup as long, your syrup flavor is going to change, or the quality of your syrup is going to decrease is just not true. The biggest thing that an RO is going to do is it does heat up your sap a little bit as it goes through the machine. It also concentrates those bacteria and concentrates the sugar with the bacteria. So bacteria are warmed up so they can grow faster, and now you've concentrated all those bacteria into a smaller space with more food so they can eat through that food faster. So we need to be thinking about what's going to be going on with that sap, how we're going to handle that sap, how we're going to get it boiled, and making sure we've got the tanks clean, that concentrated sap is going into so that we don't have problems later on down the line with sap issues and certain quality issues because of it. There's producers that I know of that generally make very light syrup, and they purposefully leave concentrate set around to try and darken their syrup up a little bit because that's what their customer demand is for, is that darker, more robust flavored syrup. So you can play with that a little bit, but it's just something to keep in mind, something to think about. We shouldn't be leaving concentrate set around without being refrigerated. There's producers who can hold concentrate for long periods of time if you keep it cool enough to stifle that bacteria growth. But just putting concentrate into a tank after you RO'd it to 10 bricks and letting it set overnight is generally not a good idea. The other thing to remember is ROs slow down the colder they get. Generally, we're running 40 to 45 degree sap, so we're not seeing that much of a decrease in efficiency on the machine. But those days when it's 35, 36 degrees and the trees are running like heck because we've got a low pressure system moving through, now we've got that really cold sap coming into the sugar house. Generally, you see a very dramatic decrease in performance on your RO. The smaller ROs generally suffer a little bit more than the big ROs because the pressure, you're just not running quite as high pressures and you can't increase the pressure to force it through the machine. But it's something to be noted, we're only, if you've got 35 degree sap, you're only about 70% as efficient as if you were running 55 degree sap. 55 degrees is the rated flow of any membrane across the entire RO industry. It's not just the maple industry. Generally, we're not seeing sap quite that high. So when you see a machine that's rated at a 600 gallon an hour machine, probably never going to see quite 600 gallons an hour through it unless you've got really warm sap all the time, or it was rated at a true flow at a cool temperature. We try, when we sell machines, to size them and have that conversation to make sure that you're getting a machine that you know is going to work for you, so that you understand the fact that it's not going to be flowing quite as fast as what maybe the rated membrane flow would be. That's something that we just try and do as we're selling machines out into the world. Just a little bit of numbers for examples here. RO that would be, or a membrane, that's rated to run 600 gallons an hour at 55 degrees. Is only going to be flowing about 430 gallons an hour at 37 degrees. So as you can see, you've lost 170 gallons an hour of flow. Definitely noticeable even in smaller machines. So Basic operation of the RO is 4 different cycles. Concentration cycle, that's where we're actually running sap. The desugar cycle, the rinse cycle, and the wash cycle. The one thing I definitely want to make sure to mention a couple times is how important that desugar cycle is in the smaller machines, especially. It's easy to not think about all the sap or all the sugar that's stuck inside that machine when you're running, until you go to rinse that machine out and you realize it takes you 5 minutes of running water into that machine to get all that sugar out. It's a pretty significant amount of sugar that can be dumped down the drain if we're not desugaring that machine. Also makes it wash a lot harder because we've got to clean that sugar out of the machine that we could have rinsed out before we get started with the wash cycle. I like to recommend guys run their machines for at least 5 minutes. The little machines, generally takes about 5 minutes to desugar them. The bigger the machines get, the longer it takes. I also like to run and desugar my machine down to 2 bricks or less. I don't want to be dumping sap on the ground, is what it comes down to. Generally, when we desugar it, depending on what the sap flows in the next couple days look like they're going to be, I will put the first little bit of sap that comes out as we're desugaring it back up into my feed tank. We'll boil that right away. A lot of it we put back in our main sap storage because I don't want to be, as you're desugaring, it gets lower and lower, and it goes from, if we're running 10 bricks out of the RO, it drops from 10 to 8 pretty fast. It'll stay at 8 a little bit longer, then drop from 8 to 6, and then 6 to 4, and then it'll stay at that 4 for a long time as that sugar's coming out of the machine. And I frankly don't want to be boiling or brick sap, so we'll put that right back to the main sap storage tank, and it goes to the RO again tomorrow and take up that water that we just reintroduced to it. But we want to make sure we're sugaring the machine, not only in quality washes, but also so it's not wasting the sugar. Is there a question in the back somewhere? Okay. I thought I saw a hand go up out of the corner of my eye. One thing you can do during the day, especially during the long days where you're running it for 8 or 10 hours, is shut that machine down in the middle of the day, do a quick desugar cycle, and then rinse it for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Just run a bunch of permeate water through that machine, and usually you'll recover a lot of the flow. You won't ever get it back to 100%, just soap wash clean, but you may get 50% of the flow that you lost back on it, 60% of that flow. Usually it's worth the time to do. Also, it'll make the machine wash up easier at the end of the day and better at the end of the day. At the end of every operational day on the small machines, we need to be desugaring and giving that machine a good rinse. If you've got time, soap wash, it's a good idea. I'd like to say to soap wash machines every day, but in all reality, the little machines, the 4-inch machines, the micro 2s, the mini micros, the nano ROs, the bucket up machines, they generally don't need to be soap washed every day. You're not running for long periods of time. Our big machines at home, we run them for 10, 12, 14 hours, sometimes even longer than that. They really need to get washed at the end of the day. Little machine, if you run it for 3-4 hours, a good rinse and you can go back to running it. You can get away with that for 2, 3, 4 days, depending on how clean your sap is, before you're going to have to wash it. The big thing to watch out for, kind of keep track of your machine. We keep notepads, they hang on each RO, and we write down what they're doing when we start, and we kind of watch that flow fall off, and then when we get below what we consider to be the acceptable level of flow in the machine, we'll shut it down, we'll either do a soap wash, or we'll at least desugar and rinse them for a while. But just kind of keep track what your machine is doing from day to day, and when it gets down to where you don't like how slow it's running, then do a wash. If it's going to be shut down for more than 2 to 3 days, I would recommend doing a soap wash regardless, so you don't allow all that bacteria to grow in the machine the whole time. When they sit for extended period of time, either during freeze-ups in the middle of syrup season or warm spells in the middle of syrup season, when you start to get excessive bacteria growth, that can hamper the membrane and cause long-term production and flow. It can also give your syrup a wrong flavor. I've seen it where guys have left their machine not dirty, but not soap wash clean for 3-4 days. They go back to making syrup again after things warm up, and they don't make good syrup until they get that machine washed and given it all pretty bad bacteria will metabolize off flavor because you just made that machine into a big old bacteria trap, and now you've pushed all your sap through the bacteria and given it all that nice bacteria flavor. So something to watch out for if the machine's going to be sitting for any period of time. When we rinse the machine, at the end of the day, the pre-wash rinse, I'd like to run at least half of the machine's capacity per hour through the machine to get that rinse before the wash, or your end of the day rinse if you're not planning on doing the wash. soap out. I like to actually run a little bit more water than that to get the soap out. I'm always very, very concerned that we're going to give our syrup the soapy flavor from the RO soap. So we try and use all the water we have to rinse the machine. You can't over-rinse the RO, but you can sure under-rinse it. And nobody wants to make soap-flavored syrup. So 600-gallon-hour machine requires a minimum of 300 gallons of rinse water. On your 4-membrane machine or your 4-inch membrane machines, my general rule is 50 gallons of water per 4-inch membrane on the machine. So if you've got a 2 4x4 machine, 100 gallons of water should get all the soap rinsed out of it. But that varies per machine and depending on the machine and how much liquid that machine contains. Some of the older 4-inch machines take a little bit more water to rinse out because the pressure vessels were bigger and they just had more liquid volume inside of them. So here it talks about hot water washes with soap. You can also do hot water washes without soap. The soap helps the wash be somewhat more effective, but if you don't have time or you don't have enough rinse water to get all that soap back out of the machine, hot water wash with soap or without soap goes a long way to getting that machine clean. What I like to do, especially if we've got lots of time, if we're shut down and we won't have SAP for another 12 or 14 hours, we'll run a hot water wash without soap and then rinse the machine a little bit and then run a soap wash right afterwards. You get most of the stuff out with the hot water, and then you can let that soap really work on what's really, the dirt and the bacteria and the fouling that's really hard to get out of that machine. It makes the soap a little more effective and it gets you a better wash. Start the machine up when you're washing with soap, you start letting the pumps run. Your machines where they don't heat the water up like our Micro 2, I generally leave that machine run until the water gets up to 70 to 80 degrees and then start adding the soap. The machines where you have to bring hot water to them, just add the soap to them right away. And you want to be checking the pH of that soap. The pH needs to be as high as possible to be safe for that membrane, but no higher than what is safe for the membrane. Most of the membranes in the maple industry can run to a pH of 12, so we want to be, soap washing at a pH of 11 to get as much out of that wash as possible. 118 degrees is the maximum on pretty much any membrane before you're going to start doing damage to that membrane. That's just what the plastic that they make the membrane out of can take. Time and temperature is what's critical. You want to keep that wash cycle washing for the correct amount of time at the correct temperature, at the correct pH to get a proper wash. One thing that you definitely want to be doing also when you're doing your hot water washes is rechecking that pH. Put the water in there, put the soap in there, you watch it come up to your pH of 11, let that thing run for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, check the pH again. That water recirculates around in there, may get diluted some again from there being not enough chemical throughout the machine. The other thing that can happen is all the bacteria in that machine can start neutralizing that soap, so you should be adding more soap back in to get as effective of a wash as possible. Make sure you're using the right soap for your machine. Pretty much all of the ROs being built nowadays, no matter the membrane, are all not chlorine tolerant membranes, so they take the sodium hydroxide type soaps to wash. Back in the day, there was a lot of the PVD1 membranes put in machines. That was a membrane that was a chlorine tolerant membrane, so they could take chlorine to the water and it wouldn't harm the membrane, but they did take a different soap to wash. Sodium hydroxide soap will clean them up, but it doesn't do a very good job. And if you use the soap that those membranes need in a non-chlorine tolerant membrane, you'll destroy the membrane immediately. So just know your soap, know that you're using the right soap for your machine. Like it says here, make sure to recheck the pH after a little bit, because the stuff that you're washing out will be neutralizing the soap. The other thing that should be mentioned here is the fact that we need to make sure if we're using non-permeate water to rinse the machine, we want to make sure that it's not chlorinated water. Don't bring city water out to your sugar house for the first time of the season to rinse out that RO. Pretty much every RO built now does not have a chlorine tolerant membrane in it, and chlorinated water will ruin the membrane. The membranes that we use in all of our machines are not tolerant above 1 part per million chlorine, and city water has more chlorine in it than that. Some of the chlorine can be taken out of city water, so it depends on what agents they use to chlorinate the water. Some of it evaporates out pretty quickly if you leave it sit in the tank overnight, but that depends on your city. So my general recommendation is do not use city water to rinse your machine at all. If you need water, find it out of somebody's well, and if it's hard water, you can run it through the machine once to make your own permeate. So just don't use city water, don't use chlorinated water in your RO, because it will do damage to that membrane quickly.
What about soft water?
I generally, instead of using soft water or running water through a water softener, I like to take, if you can get hard water out of your water system and then run it through the machine to take all the mineral out of that water. Doesn't happen much, but I've seen where water softeners will let a little bit of that salt pass, and I don't like the idea of that salt getting into the membrane. Generally, a water softener should not, if it's regenerating properly, all the salt should end up down the drain. I just don't want to take the chance of there being, ending up with salt in the system somewhere. So my recommendation would be take hard water, run through the machine, make permeate, and then use that permeate to rinse it. If the machine is dirty, you can rinse it for a little bit with your hard water, then RO some of your hard water to make permeate, and that permeate will be what you want to be using because it's demineralized and it's going to clean everything up as best as possible. So maximizing the performance of the machine has a lot to do with making sure that machine is clean. So I talked about soap washes a little bit, there's also acid washes. Soap generally gets the bacterial fouling and some of the biologicals out of the membrane. The acid is used to get the mineral out of the membrane. The higher the concentrate you go, the more problems you're going to have with minerals. Little machines that you're going 8 or 10% concentrate, generally you won't struggle with much mineral fouling because you're not getting that mineral super concentrated in that machine. When you're going to 20, 25, 30 bricks, you end up having a lot more mineral issues.